Let's see who turns up. So what we're doing is we're recording the session. And what I expect is I'm going to have quite a few people that will be watching the recording rather than actually be here live. Because, of course, this is in the middle of the day, and who has time? We don't all have time to put aside an hour in the middle of the day. So hence, the recording will be available. And that's also if you need to go early. But yeah, people are just joining now, and I will begin in a moment. Well, welcome. What we're going to be talking about is the practical application of the Vanguard method and some of the key methods and techniques that you will be able to take away from this session that you then can potentially use in your work, regardless of whether you're using the Vanguard method or not. And if any of you are using the Vanguard method or attempting to look at it, then you should hopefully get some tips from me in this session. And if you have any other thoughts and tips, then we can discuss those at the end. So it will take an hour, but we've scheduled for longer time for more questions and answers if anybody wants to do that. So this is coming out of the Org Hub, the SI Organization Hub, and we have been having events and doing various different things, creating white papers, etc. And this is one of the events that we've created. What we hope to do is we're actually using different sources, including this one, which is Mike Jackson's complexity book, Critical Systems Thinking and the Management of Complexity. He lists a whole load of different techniques and methods, and we're going to select some of those for future events, and the Vanguard method is one of those. Are there any questions before we start? Okay, great. Right, I'm going to share my screen now, and let's take it forward from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a short case study. You may have seen this case study before because it's one that I use quite regularly, and I'm going to after that I'm going to then pull out the key methods and issues from the Vanguard method. So, what's our traditional view of an organization? A traditional view is like a sausage machine from the Industrial Revolution, from manufacturing, whether you've got inputs, you've got processes, you've got outputs. And when I go into an organization and I ask them, show me how you work, what do you think they produce? Well, of course, what they normally produce is the usual thing, which is this, which of course is quite pointless in terms of understanding how an organization really works. So I put that aside, and what the Vanguard method helps us to do is to look at an organization from a very different perspective. And the core of the Vanguard method is a series of steps that starts with understand. And in some books and the more traditional side of Vanguard, this is called check. So this is about seeing the current organization as a system. And then after that, there's a decision point as to whether we proceed or not. And the next stage is then an experiment, a test and learn experiment about where we apply systems thinking to with a team in a new way of working to see what we can learn. And from that learning, we then create a new prototype. And I've got some of the members of the Org Hub team here. They will be shouting at me if I'm doing something wrong or they can't hear or can't see something, and also looking at some of the questions that might be appearing in the chat. So please feel free to put any comments that you have, agreements or disagreements, that's fine. And in particular, any questions which we will follow up with later on. Right, so that is the standard method that if you look up in the book, that's what you get. And this is generally what is followed, although this can be mixed up in different ways, depending on the organization and the type of service that we're talking about. The primary element of the understand phase, and I think this is one of the most important parts of the Vanguard method. So I'm going to be highlighting it in detail here. This is what I do when I go into an organization. From the moment I walk into an organization, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking at where does the demand from customers come in? And if it's the public sector, I'm looking at where do those demands from the public sector come in? By phone or by forms or digital, online, etc. And then I'm asking myself, what's the purpose of this service? Now, the purpose of a service and the purpose of an organization may be two different things. So I'm looking at the purpose of the service that I am engaged in here. Then we're going to look at how the organization responds to those demands, and we're going to measure that response. And we're going to measure how good our service is. And then we're going to look at the flow from the initial demand all the way through to the end of the process. The fifth element is we're going to then ask ourselves the question as to why did we design it this way? Don't forget, this is still the current system. We're not going to change anything. We're just going to do an understand phase where we go into the work and understand these things. And I'm going to show you an example of one that I did some time ago. But number 5 is, why did we design it this way? So this is now the real questioning coming in. And then, of course, the last one, which is the mental models and the behavior of the decision makers as to how we ended up designing the system in this way. We also put a boundary around what the area of interest is that we're looking at. Sometimes it's a service, sometimes it's wider than that. It may even be, very often, it will be a contextual boundary that we may put around whatever it is that we're looking at. And that kind of shifts over time. It's a flexible boundary. It's not static. So where do we start? Of course, we start with demand, start with purpose. So I'm going to go through a public sector service, and this applies, by the way, exactly the same to a private sector service. And the service is allocating housing to people in need in one area, in a town, actually. So when I went to ask the people who were working there, what's the purpose? Oh, it's to give people a house. Okay, fine. So the way that this often starts is that I gather together a group of frontline people, and they are from the front line of this type of service. And we start off on day one. On day one, I ask them this question. Whatever it is that they say, I write it up on a flip chart. And I don't argue, we just say, right, that's what it is. And then we save it for later. And of course, we start with demand. So in this case, we went to listen to calls that were coming in. And there weren't many calls that were coming in because the staff in this organization were not allowed to take calls. So the calls would come into the contact center, not into the actual service itself. So I had to go to the contact center. And by the way, the people in the service had never done that. That's a really important point. We're expanding the boundary of this to include the contact center. And we're looking at the digital demand coming in. And we're looking at the emails. And we're looking at people that walk in and say, hello, I have a question. So that in itself was actually quite tricky to understand the variety of demand. But what was interesting about the demand, the way that we responded, is that we have one way of responding and one way only. It's a very fixed transactional standard response, which is you need to send it to us in writing. You need to send your question in writing. Or no, we don't answer your question. The answer's online. And then also I looked at the process behind the demand that came in. So if the demand is, hello, I need housing, we then, of course, look at that process and we find that the process is a very standard transactional process that every single person that comes in has to go through that process because the organization says we have to be fair, we have to be equitable, etc. I had no idea about this process before. I'd hardly ever come across it before. So we do a value and failure demand analysis, and some of you may well be familiar with that, and I'm not going to go into the detail of that right now, except the fact that what was really interesting is that the value demand, which is the demand that we wanted, was 37%. The demand that the system has caused is actually 63%. So you can see here that initially, already in the first week, we're seeing something that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And the organization had no idea that that was the case, by the way. This was new to them. And the assistant director was also connected to the team. So we had a team of, I think, 4 people, and the assistant director was there about at least 1 day a week. So what's the measures? The measures is derived from the purpose. So now we're looking at what are the measures that the organization used. What's the systemic measure from the customer's perspective or from the user's perspective? Now, if you're in need of housing, that's quite an easy one. It's from when I apply to when you've helped me with housing and you've given me a property, isn't it? So what we did in the team, and again, they had no measure of that. Their measures were all split up. The measures that we then undertook highlighted the actual progress of achieving that measure for people in need. And they split up the service into bronze, silver, and gold. And gold was the most needy. Bronze were people that were least needy. And what we found is that the average time it took for people to be housed was between 650 days and 750 days, which was a huge shock to the assistant director, who thought actually that we were within the limits of the KPIs that they were using. Don't forget, have the model for understand in your head. And one of the elements is flow. So this is a snapshot of what we did. What we do is every single member of the team participates in looking at the actual activities that the organization has, that we go through from end to end, not the process. It's the actual activities, the communication, the forms, the information, very different to a process chart. And we look at, we took a series of cases. In this case, we looked at 16 cases in detail. We looked at the paperwork. We looked at all the records that we had. How long did it take? What was going on there? So we had to familiarize ourselves. Again, this is the first time that the people in the organization had actually done this in this way. And I'm going to highlight an example here where we look at the experience of somebody, and it took this person, for instance, we just took them at random. It took them 9 months to get onto the system correctly from when they first submitted their application form. I'm not going to go through this. This is a bit of an animated thing. I'm just going to talk about what it was like to work here. We use application forms only. We're not allowed to talk to people. Customers are awful and we don't want to talk to them anyway. Customers lie. I need to be behind glass when I talk to people. Basically, our job is about IT. So these are all the phrases that were told to me by the team. These are all the things that it was like about actually being here. And so they gave me a picture of what it was like. So I built that up in my head and it looks something like this. And they had a waiting list of 6,000 houses. Sorry, they had a waiting list of 6,000 people waiting to be housed. Now, this was a relatively small town, and they certainly didn't have 6,000 houses available. So at the end of the understand phase, one of the things they did was to put the whole picture of what the system looked like onto a sheet. This is how the operational part of the system looked like, onto a flip chart. And I'm going to go through with you now the detail of this, because this is what the Vanguard method uncovers, if you do it in this way. And again, they had no idea. So this is what we found. Then this is data over a period of a month. So a form comes in digital or in paper form. And if it's in paper form, it comes in through the post. We have to then match that information coming in with any previous applications, any current applications. So we index it. We check the form and we band bronze, silver, or gold. So we categorize them into 3 categories at that point. And if they have medical needs, they submit a separate medical form as well. If they disagree with their result from us, the banding, they can appeal. And appeals are something we really don't like in the team because it takes up huge amounts of time. But it's in the rules. We have to do that. And if the medical form that's submitted justifies it, we will potentially increase their banding to a more serious level. We then have to keep updating their records because over time we put them on the waiting list, and over time things change. So we have to keep updating that. And we find that actually there are errors at all these different places. So what we did is that we discovered those errors that we didn't really know about before. And then the person waits for the advertisement to come in. Now that advertisement appears once every 2 weeks online, and they can bid for a property where we have to match and verify those bids, and we come up with a winner, a bit like a lottery, and then that person is offered that property, and they get the property potentially. So that is how allocation system works in England, and probably 95% of all local government works exactly that way. What did we uncover? So this is the first element of the understand model, the model for check. What we found is that 285 came in. 75% of everything that comes in has an error and has to be returned. 75%. They can imagine the amount of work and effort that goes into that. 95 of those that came in were medical forms. And Michael, by the way, could you please mute yourself? We're hearing some noises. Thank you. So from 95 were medical, and it takes on average 6 months to deal with a medical form because we need to engage with a nurse, we need to engage with doctors. 6 months. There were 27 appeals in that month, and they take on average about 7 months to deal with. 6,000 people on the list. 105 advertisements will come in that month. 2,600 people bid in that month. We offer 35 people that have the property and they refuse it, okay? And 87 get housed in that month. So the question that we have now in the team, this took in total 4 weeks. And at the end of it, the team basically was sitting there with their mouths open going, how on earth could we have designed this? How on earth does this actually work? It doesn't work. It's full of bureaucracy. It's full of waste. And the assistant director, deputy director, was holding his head in his hands. He had no idea that it was this bad. This is really, I mean, you can all see this, quite terrible. So they redefined the purpose as being actually, all we do is we process application forms, and our job is really to make it difficult for people to get housing, because we make it difficult. And one of the things that I did with the deputy director is I worked with him in terms of understanding, you won't be able to see this, the detail of this, but what's the thinking that was in your head that where you developed some of these attributes to the service, all the checking, all the rework, etc. And we were slowly developing this form over those 4 weeks as he got ideas. And so I was doing a lot of work with him one-to-one. And it was about, well, you need to create a waiting list. You have to have eligibility criteria. We categorize people. Everything has to be documented. Everything. So that's that model for check or for understand. And you can see how it was used in this situation. Now, anyone here in any organization can either use that model or you can use elements of that model. It's kind of a standalone thing for a systemic inquiry. And this has been designed around systems thinking principles, which I'm going to go into a bit later. And the next phase is the experiment or plan. And we explore possibilities here. So what we do is we take the current way of working, we get those frontline people from the team in the room, and we get rid of all that. And their task is to create value. And these are the principles that I give the team. Number one, understand what matters for each person. And that's what we're going to determine the design. Number two, we make decisions based on knowledge and evidence. Number three, only do what's needed to create value. Number four, take ownership end to end. Number five, work as a team without any departmental barriers. And six, the purpose of this at the moment is not to develop a new service, it's to learn. That's what we're here to do. We're here to learn. So we're going to take real demands, and that's what we started doing. So here's a list of this is the list that we made in the team. So we started with the top, and we started to work down as we took demands during a period of several weeks. And each time we would try something a bit new, something different. We didn't use forms. That was the first thing that went out. And we'd talk to people and ask them, so what kind of housing do you need, etc. And this is a key element of what we're doing with the team at this point, is that we're going into the work, listening to them, understanding what their needs are, in some cases visiting their property, and we come back into the room and discuss it as a whole team. Right, what did we see? What did we learn? What's different, etc. So this is about action learning, a way to develop understanding and learning at the same time. And it's all done together with the team. So we spend a lot of time doing that. So in terms of Ivy, for instance, this is, I think, the first demand we ever got. She was already on the housing list, but she submitted a medical form, and she lives in a bungalow and a garden, which actually would be great if she could move, because then we could use that for somebody else. And she's already been bronze band. She's getting some problems walking, and but the thing is, she had no real chance of getting a successful bid because she was only in bronze band. So bronze band was really low, but we would never tell her that. So the poor woman was bidding with actually no real hope of getting anywhere. And what we found, we took 35 demands in the experiment, and this is what we found, to the shock of the team. 56% were not actually in housing need of the people that we took. 37% were in some need, and it was only 21 that were actually in real high need. And before, don't forget, we'd been dealing with all of these as though they were the same. And the way that I work with teams is I've got some samples here of some of the things that we would have put up on the wall. These are all written by the teams. Some of these are from different pieces of work, by the way. And this is an example of the way that we document things. The team go to the wall, they stick things on the wall that are relevant to what they're doing. They're mapping they're developing a new process. They're writing up the new demands and what they're learning. And effectively, this picture here was really what was going on in their heads when they were doing this, is that they thought that they had a service that they were working on in the room. You open the door and you find all this complexity, and it was just really something else. And with Ivy, remember she submitted the medical form? The problem she had is she loved her house. The problem was that she couldn't deal with the garden anymore, and she loved the garden. So it wasn't actually the house that was needed, it was a gardener. So the team found a charity who did older people's gardens free of charge. We never heard from her again. So the shock realization at that point was, actually, this isn't about giving people a house, it's about solving people's housing problems. Those are two very, very different things. So with the 35 people that we took, we only needed to, I think it was 3 people we needed to move into other housing. The rest, we solved their housing problem for them, usually by staying where they were. So do you see what happened here? A complete reformulation of the purpose of the service that the team got, but it took some weeks to get there. This wasn't something that happened early on or very quickly. So it was about reframing the team's perspective by understanding the real needs of people. It was about understanding the true purpose of the service as defined by the customer or the user. So this is an outside-in perspective. So this is shifting from an organizational perspective to an outside-in perspective. So these things are, for me, the most powerful things that I ever do. And these are both core systemic concepts that I'm hoping here that I'm demonstrating how powerful they really are. We experimented with some new measures, is one of the things they were trying to measure. How do you measure when someone has been helped, when they never come back and tell you? We engage decision makers. On the right-hand side is a picture of a senior person that come in to engage with the team. Why? Because I refuse to write reports. I do not write reports. Reports are the worst thing because they reduce the complexity of the work and the richness of the work that we're doing into something that someone reads, and they interpret it in a way that makes sense to them, but doesn't allow that person to see things from a different perspective. On the right-hand side, you've got a senior decision maker coming in, and we help them to see things from a different perspective. And then you've got the prototype. And should we just see quickly what the prototype, and then we'll finish this case study. Remember that one? What we ended up doing is we listened to the customer, to the user. No forms are allowed. They come in and we speak to them. We ask them what they need. We write the details on a sheet. We assess together the level of need right there and then. No delay. It happens right there in front of them. And we identify options with them in front of them there and then. Either we house them or we help them to look for housing themselves. And that's a sheet of paper that they used in the experiment to develop that new process. Let's have a look at the measures. There were 6,293 people on the waiting list. 2 years later, there were 309. 62.7% failure demand. When this was complete, there was 3% failure demand. Remember the 27 appeals a month, which they hated? In 1 year, there was 1 appeal. There was aggression and frustration, both with the staff and the people who weren't being housed, and that changed around completely. So you got very demoralized staff, and you got people that were actually being helped. And we had an unknown, before we didn't know the real cost of this because it was complex and it strayed into other services as well. The team developed true links with other groups because they were looking at this end to end. End to end means that you have to go into other organizations, by the way. And instead of 22 full-time equivalent people in the department, we only needed 15. So that's the impact. Oh, and happy senior manager. That was the impact of a new way of working in a service like this, and that extends to all different types of services as well. So what I'm going to show you now is just a couple of slides that I made up. Before, the department was focused, it was one department called housing allocations, and you can see here it was part of wider housing system. What we ended up doing was instead of that split at the bottom, which is all the different things that we were looking at separately, it was all linked at the top. The top of the diagram demonstrated that we were actually looking at this holistically, in terms of looking at the system from the person's perspective. So we were able to go into all of those boxes at the bottom to help deal with the situation with the people that needed help. Let's have a look at some of the concepts. So that's the end of the case study. So these are the systems thinking concepts and methods that I find are core to this approach. So the first thing is understanding complexity. When there is complexity there, understanding logical transactional processes when it's a logical process. Both of them are very different and they need designing in very different ways. What you will have seen, you would have seen no reports, but what you will have seen is the way that I put things up on the wall, which was about it was about storytelling, but it's not someone standing up and telling a story. It's more about the fact that we're putting artifacts and we're putting our thoughts up on the wall in the room where the team are. Now, what happens there is that they then begin to own what's on the wall. It's theirs. And suddenly someone in the team will go, actually, I think, I've just had a thought. They can stand up and they can take what's on the wall and they can change it. And we have a discussion, so yeah, let's change that. So once a week, we would talk about purpose, and actually purpose was starting to shift. And if it did, we'd write it up underneath the old purpose. So we could see a progression in terms of our learning. So that to me is what part of storytelling is about. It's about really understanding, really owning and understanding systemic concepts that are also multi-layered. And I don't know a better way of doing that than by giving ownership to people in the team that are doing it, and to use pictures, basically, to use diagrams, to use, and a lot of them are developed from them. I'm not standing up there and often doing these things. The other thing that is really part of this is, and this starts from the very beginning on the very first week, is when we listen to demand. Listening to demand is not just about value and failure demand. It's about helping the people in the team to start to actually listen to people and their needs. So when you have a headset on and you're sitting next to someone who's dealing with that person, you're just sitting there listening. You're not doing anything. You don't have to type anything in. You don't have to categorize them. You're listening and you're going, oh, I'm hearing this in a way that I've never listened to this person before. So, and I'm helping them to focus on the person rather than the way that we are dealing with them. So it's, why have they come to us? Oh, because we've sent them a letter and they don't understand the letter, or it's confused them, or it's the wrong information on the letter. Oh, so before they go, bloody idiots, why don't they read the letter properly? oh no, it's our fault. The letter's wrong. It's not their fault, because you start to hear elderly people, different types of people whose language isn't English. They kind of they connect with the customer. That begins to develop an outside-in perspective. And that's the first thing I have to do with them, is to shift them away from an internal organizational perspective, which we all have. All of us who work in an organization will slowly develop that internal perspective. And we need a push to be able to remember what it's like again, to see it from the customer's point of view. if I don't do that, I cannot do anything else. I cannot move to any other parts of this method without focusing on that. Now, sometimes that does take time. In health and social care, it takes time. But if you're working in a bank, for instance, or an insurance company, in a contact center, it's straightforward because you can immediately relate to them. If it's in health situation, maybe me and my experiences, I can't relate directly to them, but I can over time. I can understand that where they're coming from is a place of great difficulty. So that's the third systems thinking concept. And in terms of the next one is co-design. So you notice that I've got a team of frontline people in the room. They are the ones that are going to go through this process, and I basically guide them through the process. I don't secretly do this myself first and then present it to them or whatever. They do the work, and the direction of the Vanguard method, the way that it goes, is that the team direct the journey through the method in a way that they're the ones that come up with the solutions, the learning, the outcomes. In some cases, I don't agree with them. Now, if I don't agree with them, what I then do is either I have to find a situation where they can learn from it and then that can shift, or I go with it and we'll see what comes out. Because sometimes I actually don't know what the solutions should be. I've had myself in that situation a few times, which means that I then have to trust on the method. I have to trust the principles. So to me, if I could take away one thing from the Vanguard method, it would be those principles that we use when we start the experiment with a team. Those principles begin the process of systems change and systems thinking in their heads. And as soon as they start using them, they'll veer off and they'll start reverting back to their old ways of working. My job is to go, hey, hang on a minute. Isn't that old world? Or is that to do with one of the principles? So for the first few days, there's a lot of that trying to pull away from the current frame of reference and current ways of thinking. The senior leadership that are involved in this, that are responsible for this, they are connected to the team. I make sure they connect at least once a week with the team, and that once a week is several hours. They will listen to demand. They will look at the flow. They will come to the room. They will not wait for an email or report from any of us in the team. So one of the helpful models which I use is, of course, so that's the list there of the 4 elements that I've described so far, and I'm going on to the 5th one, which is the end-to-end, which is tying up some of these, but also looking at the whole end-to-end process. So with Ivy, her end-to-end process is something to do with the garden. That's not to do with house. It's not to do with me. That's not housing. Yeah, it is. It is. You have to take it right through to end and end. So what this is really about is pushing the team to understand this concept that we are all looking at a snapshot or part of the system. And my job is to help them to gradually uncover the whole system without me doing it for them. And that's the bit that I find most interesting. Because if I do it for them, they won't agree, or they'll argue, or they'll go, yeah, well, it makes sense, John, but I'm not sure. It doesn't really sit. It's like it becomes a logical discussion. It just becomes a picture. But when they see it for themselves, they get to the point where they're realizing that they're the ones that have been developing this reductionist silo working. So I have this concept in my head. when I work with those teams. And this concept has helped me a lot in helping to simplify some of the things that I needed simplification with when I first started working this way. And for those of you that are familiar with the Vanguard method, you will have seen this before. But if you haven't, if someone asks me what's the whole purpose of the Vanguard method, it's to change thinking. It's not to make improvements happen. It's not to do any of the things that I've mentioned so far. All of those things are to do with one thing: it's to change thinking from the traditional command and control perspective and the way that we look at things to understanding the way that the system works, redesigning the system according to new ways of thinking, which of course is outside in, and you end up with totally different outcomes. So that, on one slide, is the core of the Vanguard method. And it's the changing thinking that is the most challenging. That's why some of the things that I've been describing, I have to go through. When I first started this, I thought I could sit down and rationally have a discussion with somebody about the paradigm in their head, the thinking in their head, and then let's have a discussion about changing that. Forget it. Oh boy, that doesn't happen, and if it does, it's happened because I've found a technique to help it do that. But I would never sit down with someone now and attempt to do that in a room. I've been ejected from rooms when I've been trying to do that. And what this comes down to, one of an additional concept that John Seddon, who developed the Vanguard method, got from Deming, which is 95% of the outcomes that you can see in a system are down to the system design rather than the people. And there's quite some discussion. When I first saw this, I thought that's rubbish. I knew a lot of lazy people that weren't working right, all of this kind of thing. Of course, yeah, no, maybe 60% of it is down to the people. But after I've done this, and after I've seen people who are lazy, who weren't working very well, switch and change the way that they work based on the fact that the system has changed, totally changed my understanding of what that concept actually is about. So I myself had to go through this to be able to believe that. This is not something, again, I wouldn't have this discussion about the 95% from Deming in a rational conversation, because people will simply disagree because it doesn't match their version of reality. And I'm not surprised, because when you look at the performance of an organization or a service, what do you see? You actually see the people behaving in certain ways and doing things in certain ways. What I didn't realize then is actually a lot of those are down to the way that the manager is managing them, the way that the system is designed, the KPIs, the measures. Those are the things that we really look for in the Vanguard method. Is why does someone behave in the way that they do? And I've come across people that are racist, that are very unhelpful towards users and customers, and they switch over time to become the most useful and empathetic and helpful people that I've ever met. Same people, without any training, simply by changing the system and their position. Don't forget, people are part of the system. Their behaviors and their attitude are derived from the way that the system works. So you change that and you allow the motivation to come out of people, and they find that motivation generates a whole new different way of working. So John Seddon very often says, you do this and culture change comes free. So culture change is an outcome of changing the system. It's not something that I ever go in and say, right, I'm going to go in there and change the culture. The culture always changes, but because culture is an emergent outcome of the system and the way it works. Again, definition of the system is not a physical definition. It's a more holistic definition of the organization, its context, and all the things that happen within the organization, especially relating to people and how they interact with each other. Right, so that was number 7. And where are we in terms of time? So we've done 45 minutes. I will be wrapping this up soon and going into questions. But I did make quite a list of things with regard to systems thinking, because that's what this event is actually about. So number 8 is moving from analysis, so which is a very reductionist type of thing, of looking at individual data points, to synthesis, being able to stand back and looking at the whole. Almost all the time I go into an organization, I can't trust the data. The data is misinterpreting what it's meant to be. Sometimes it's wrong. So to rely on data and information is something which I have learned not to do. So I've learned to synthesize what I can see and link that to the data and understand why the data itself that we've got in the organization is actually wrong, and start to develop new ways of gathering new types of data. The next one, of course, is variety, Ashby's law. And what this is very important, where you've got variety coming into the organization, instead of a standard service or standard process absorbing that variety, this is about matching that level of variety. So one of the elements of the new prototype design is that the flexibility of the service matches that variety. So you can imagine with housing allocations, the variety was huge. Every single person that came in was not the same as the one that came in before. So the team had to learn, how do we develop a flexible service that where before we had something that was standard? How do you manage people with a very flexible service where different frontline people will be doing different things on different days? So these are all things that we had to work on and understand. So it was moving away from standardization and reductionism to a more systemic, flexible approach. And one more thing I want to show you with regard to this is that the model for understand, or the model for check, which is this one here, it is in fact, it mirrors the iceberg model, except the iceberg model should be more upside down. So the iceberg model with mental models and assumptions, that's equivalent to number 6. Structures and connections and why is number 5. Patterns in the workplace and the processes are 3 and 4. And what's visible is the red bit there. So for me, the iceberg model, when I first saw it, was it put a lot of things in place that were bouncing around my head. I don't necessarily put this up in front of people when I'm working with them, but this is something that's in my head when when I'm looking at anything. I have the iceberg model in my head. I find that extremely helpful. And also, this is about single and double loop learning, our gyrus. And that's useful. There are videos on YouTube that demonstrate easily what that is, and you've been seeing examples of that all the time. Developing system pictures. A system picture isn't a defined thing. It's whatever someone comes up with that helps them to understand something in a more systemic rather than a reductionist way. And it's about changing thinking. The Meadows levers for change, where the more deeper levers are to do with changing thinking. And it also, the Vanguard method also refers to rapid test and learn in the experiment. So that's a cycle of continual testing and learning, with the purpose to learn, not the purpose to come up with the right service. That happens later. And it's a journey of unlearning and learning. So we all know that systems thinking is, you can't really teach that to people. unless you're teaching tools. But to really understand systems thinking, our gyrus says that we have to unlearn first, which is what the model for understand does, before we can actually start to absorb new ways of learning. We have to acknowledge that the current organization isn't working well, or else you can't do this to someone who thinks that their service is already working well. And yeah, it's about how the senior leadership and the managers behave. So this isn't about a frontline team. This is about the decision makers and engaging them. So I have two parallel tracks. The model for understand and the leadership are both connected to that. And if I just do this with a team of frontline people and leave the leaders behind, I guarantee that this is not going to work. And that's it. Those are the key system. I'm just looking through some of the slides to see if there's anything else. Those are the key elements of what I believe are in the Vanguard method that I have found. So I hopefully left some time for some questions. And I'm just looking at some of them here. For what, Michael, you say from push to pull. This is one of the concepts that came from Toyota. So a lot of this has actually come from Toyota. And in Toyota, they have a pull system rather than a push system, yes. To what extent do you find people can respond insightfully to why the current system was designed as it was? That's come from Jill. To why the current system. I think that goes back to the fact that I have to ask the managers and the decision makers as to why they did that. So you'll find in a lot of organizations, elements of the service or the process have been put in for various reasons. Oh yeah, 3 months ago, this person had a real mistake and caused us a lot of costs. So we put that into the process. So you'll find that that's what's happened over time.
John, just to pick up on that, to what extent, I mean, the work, I do a lot of this similar kind of work. And to what extent do you feel it's necessary for people to gain insights into the current system? And even if historically they don't know why something's been designed in a particular way, versus understanding the core of what it is that they're trying to ultimately do, the why that they're now working around. There's a lot of structures, just going back to the iceberg model, there's a lot of structures that are in place within organizations. People don't know why they're there. They've been there for a long time. This is how we do things around here. And then we're trying to shift to a different way of understanding. To what extent do you feel it's important to understand the historical perspective, or do you tend to focus more on, we're just illuminating that these things might not be important to have in place, and we're starting to think about things differently?
That is what your question is really important, because I think it goes to a hidden part of the Vanguard method as to why so much effort goes into the model for understand. If you don't find out insightfully why, what I find is that people will then repeat the same errors in the new design. So if someone believes that checking is good, and you have to check people because people make mistakes, people are lazy, whatever, then the new design will have checks in them. Or they'll have standardization. Standardization is something that people believe in because it reduces cost and makes things easier. If you don't challenge that and understand when it is good to do that and when it's not good, people will put that standardization in the new design. So I spend significant amounts of time helping them to then understand, where does standardization come from? Let me talk to you about Ford. Let me talk to you about Taylor 100 years ago. Let me talk to you about the Industrial Revolution, when standardization came in, because it caused huge amounts of benefit to society. But in this situation, it's the wrong thing to do. So we do have those discussions when we're in the room, and especially with the senior decision makers. If I don't, they'll put them back in.
That's great. Thank you very much.
And this is from Ren, do you also find that to be a helpful system designer, we have to become skillful question askers and information miners? you're probably pointing to the fact that the power of good questions, and that's probably one of the most powerful things I've learned over time and developed myself, is the power of a good question. There is nothing more powerful than asking the right question that suddenly someone can, it suddenly forces people into seeing something in a different way to how they've seen it before. And it's taken me a long time to develop that skill, if you like. And I'm still not nearly as good as I would like to be. So yes, that's really a very important part. And maybe I should have added that as one of the aspects of the Vanguard method, which it actually is.
If I could just add to that, that I've heard, I don't know who said that, but there was a person saying, I don't mind being the stupid person in the room asking why. Why is it that way?
Yeah.
Because often other people are have the same question, but they're not, they're just scared of asking, and so the question won't be asked. Why is
Mm,
it this way? It's always been nice this way. Okay, but why? And then you dig into it. I do systems design for ecosystems, like designs
mm,
with permaculture and stuff like that. And being just asking question
mm.
is so powerful, so powerful.
Yeah. And if this is a bit new to people, I would encourage you to just go into the internet and look for asking good questions and starting to see what examples of those there are. It's one of those things that we can all do. I find that I just needed to practice to make it become overt. So I've been in a room with a team of people, and in the afternoon I say, right, this is what we're going to work on. But someone says, hang on, before we start, I've got this niggly thing, and they say something, and then I ask a question, and we end up the whole afternoon just talking about that because that's uncovered something that, because one person is uncovering it, it impacts the whole team, and suddenly we've made a breakthrough. So breakthroughs, and I can't plan for them; they happen when they happen, and I think that emergent nature is something I really had to control myself at the beginning. It's not like, right, today we're going to be innovative and talk about this. It has to be at the right time for when the team are ready to do that, and I think that's helping with then what you were talking about there. And Jason, you've said, I always felt great design starts by asking the right questions to the right people at the right time in the right context when they are ready to listen. And so asking it too early with a senior decision maker might come across as arrogance. So I have to have a level of engagement and trust with that person first before we can move into that position of asking good questions. They have to be in a position to be, right, I'm here to learn. And most decision makers are not in that position when I first meet them. Um, and Jason, I've always felt great. Sorry, I've asked that one. Any other questions? Any other things? Yes, Bernd.
One more question, please, before I have to leave. How do you involve the senior managers and how do you deal with that tension between the higher hierarchy people and the front line, to put it out clearly?
So, good question. I start with a team and we start to put artifacts on the wall, and maybe we haven't really engaged with a senior person yet, but I've already booked some time in for, let's say, a director that's responsible for this area. So I've got half an hour with this director. It's taken 3 weeks before I can get the half an hour. I go up to the office and, hello, I'm John. Yeah, I think we've met before, but we've got half an hour now. Right, can you come with me? So I don't sit down. I drag them out of their office and we go down to the room. And they're like slightly uncomfortable, but we go, oh, this is the room, this is the team, this is what we've been doing. And it's on the wall. And someone from the team starts to take them through what's on the wall. And they're hooked. If they've only got half an hour, they'll say, this has been really amazing. I got to put some time in my diary to come down again next week. So I show them by immersing them into a new way of engaging that this is a far better way than us having a discussion in a room or writing a report. And by the way, I've already prepped the team so that they know what to do when a senior person comes in. So it looks like it's all really smooth and slick. No presentations, just, yeah, let me show you what we did last week. Let me show you what I found out yesterday. And this is eye-opening for the senior person, because we have found things that senior person doesn't know and are really important. So we agree after that, right, can you come down once a week? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, probably at the end of the day. Can I do that? Yeah, we arrange. And then that's how I do it, Bernd. That's the only way I know how to do it, because you can't force someone to come down.
Thank you. Very clear.
Yeah. Are there any people here that are practicing any of this and finding other ways around some of these things and techniques and methods to engage people from a systemic perspective? Okay, Jason, thanks. Bye. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
We're doing a lot of this work, and I just sent you a note, John. I'm hoping we can connect and chat further. It's the topic of my dissertation, but we've been working in this way for a couple of years with the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Canada. And really looking at how we engage, as you said, exactly what you said, John. I'm thrilled to hear it. Feels great. But the senior leaders of the organization, so we work closely with the executive team, and we're right now in what we're calling a practice space around applying these kinds of tools to organizational challenges that they're experiencing. But we've also been doing workshops to also increase understanding of some of these tools, including the iceberg, which we've actually redesigned with Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks as a tree, but still the same principles. So at any rate, we are doing a lot of this work, and the principles that you're describing are very, very similar to the ones we're using. But I really appreciate the frame you've created, or that you're sharing with us. It's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And just on that point of the principles, I will modify those principles depending on the application. I mean, if I was working in a different type of organization, I would take the concepts of those principles, but I would reword them. And what I do now a lot of is that I get the team to come up with the principles, and I kind of their wording is theirs, but I make sure that they are the right principles. Like we work end to end, and things like that, so that the principles aren't mine that I've given to them, but they actually become theirs. And if anyone wants to, if the team want to, they can get up and they can change anything on the wall, including the principles, at any time. And if someone stands up and starts to change it in the wrong direction, then I say, hang on a minute, before we do that, let's all have a discussion. And I make sure that the team approach helps that person who may have suddenly go off in that direction to not to do that. And if they do have to put up one that's wrong, I find that like 2 weeks later they go, or a week later they go, I think we have to modify that again. So the journey of learning, when I started, I would try and do it to them. That isn't very good. I now help them to learn in the right way that's right for them. And they feel that it's them that have done all the work and that they've done all the learning. My role becomes more facilitation, but it's actually it's hidden leadership. I'm leading them, but in a much more hidden way than I would have done some years ago. But yeah, that's so. This is all what the Vanguard method is actually about, which you don't get from just looking at it as a model, from looking at it as a series of steps, from looking at it as to what people physically do. And you certainly don't get it from reading the chapter on the Vanguard method in that book, which I find far too simplistic, and I've got a few beefs to say to Mike Jackson about that. But yeah, and thank you for being here. I will remain here for any further questions as long as you like, long as you are. And someone said you can't bloom a flower, but you can give the plant the environment to bloom. That's exactly the right metaphor for this type of work that's taken me with my thick head quite a while to understand. And my ego.
When you work with plants, you can't not understand that.
Definitely, yeah, no, it's a really good point. And things like ego get in the way, and I come across that in the organizations I work with, of course, but I have had to work on that myself about my own ego And when I've done that, I recognize that the person that I'm working with recognizes that I've done that. And it changes the nature of our engagement. It changes the nature of how they respond to me because of the way that I am working with them. And it's not something that I've found that I've consciously done. I've found that that develops over time by looking at myself and being open and honest. So this is all about psychological safety. This is all about removing fear, which I should have actually added as one of the elements. So that was silly. I'll now do that after this. But removing fear, which is one of Deming's 14 principles, is probably, if you still have fear in the room or with any relationship, then you can forget this occurring. You have to wait for that fear to dissipate before you can make any real movement. And sometimes I'm going into an organization and I can't go as deep as I have done in this case study. And I guess I can't go quite into as much depth. So I don't. I go into a more process change level and see how far I can get. And over time, I find that that kind of works its way downwards so I can get more into more depth later on. Well, are there any other questions? Thank you again for being here and sharing your valuable time here. And I hope that it has been helpful to you. And if we want to take up any more discussion in the Org Hub feed, then please do. One of the things I've forgotten to do, which I said I'd forget to do, is if there are any other things that you would like the Org Hub to develop as an event, can you please think about that? Either put it in the chat right now or think about it and put it into the Org Hub feed in the SI forum so that other people can see it as well. It's one of the things that we struggle with, actually, is what kind of events can we put on for the Org Hub? All of us are Org Hub participants. What do you want to see? What do you want to learn? And thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, really great session. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Tripura.
Thanks.
Okay. Is there anything else? If not, we will wrap up, and this will be a recording that is available for people to listen to